All right. Could you kind of give me a brief introduction, who you are, what you're about, and sort of what your message is today?
Yeah, for sure. It's hard to grow your business when you don't know how to talk about it. My company, Lucid Consulting, helps you talk about your business with clarity so you can close more deals. So, my background I actually been in the startup ecosystem for like the last 10 years or so. I also read a lot of philosophy. And it turns out that trying to explain stuff in philosophy is a lot like trying to explain complicated tech products. So, yeah, I had a background with a lot of jobs in customer support sales, working directly with people. So I got pretty good at explaining more and more complicated things. And what I found was when you have founders who are technical, they all kind of make the same set of mistakes. And those tend to look like thinking that if you just explain it more, then people are going to want to buy it. Right. And so a lot of the work that we do at Lucid, we do other stuff too, but primarily my specialty is helping people pitch seed and series A technical B2B products, making it really simple to explain something complicated like quantum algorithms or zero methane oil and gas technology, silicon chips that are completely open source, all those sorts of things. That's kind of what we do.
What were you doing before you began all this?
Certainly Lucid. We've had Lucid for a year. I had a design agency called Ion for 3 years before that. I was director of ops at a boutique design firm in Raleigh for a year and a half before that. Somewhere in the middle, I had a startup, and I also was chief of staff for a crypto company when I had my agency. And before that, I had a variety of normal jobs and did startups on the side. So after I dropped out of college, I started a valet trash business with a buddy of mine. We did that for about a year. We made exactly zero progress, but it was a good learning experience for bringing something up from zero. I ended up doing the brand and the website and the marketing and the research and basically everything that you could possibly need to have to do. In the process of that, I kind of developed what would be things that I would do for most of the other places that I worked later on. Taking an idea and making it look legitimate enough that people want to buy it and figuring out how to explain it when you have nothing. You have no traction. You have no customer data. You're just trying to guess and fine tune and see what works.
How does it feel being a guesser?
It's tricky because as much as it's unpleasant, doing the process of like, you don't know if it's going to work. And the majority of things that you're doing, you have no way of knowing if they're going to work. While that really is not fun at times, working somewhere where you know everything and if I do X, I'm going to get Y. And that's the scope of the problems that we have is just doing the thing, not figuring out what to do. So I actually really enjoy solving kind of open-ended guessing based problems, testing, experimenting, refining, and that's a lot of where something like pitching sits, because when you go to pitch, you don't know going into it what's going to be appealing to the person you're pitching. And so you have to focus on universals, human psychology to be able to set yourself up for success, where if you did your job right, you did your research on the kind of person you're talking to and what they're interested in, and you can make something that's so appealing that you don't even have to be directly persuasive like you would be in a sales context. A good pitch tells you without you pushing. It's just attractive.
I just wanted to ask, do you have some type of background or association with, I don't know, maybe it's just your vibe, but I'm picking up, firefighter, cop, ex-military, no association with any of those in family whatsoever?
My dad's a Marine. So my dad was Special Forces Marine for, I want to say 21 years. He did basically everything that you could do in the Marines. He joined as infantry. He became recon, or he became a scout sniper, recon, went to Army Ranger School. Then he got selected to lead the sniper component of a detachment that was a pilot program for Marine Special Forces, which at the time they didn't have, which was called Detachment 1. And then after that was wildly successful, they created MARSOC, where he is currently the deputy director of the school as a civilian, retired. And he actually wrote a book about this that came out a couple months ago called Tough Rugged Bastards, which is pretty cool. I haven't had the chance to finish reading it, but I have got a couple chapters deep so far.
What was your father's influence towards your life?
Oh, he and I have always been fairly competitive. It's hard when you have somebody that's like at the top of the top, special forces guy. In high school, at one point, I got into cross country. I started being pretty good at it, and I just annihilated him in a race. I just beat him by several minutes. We had like a 5-mile run. I just crushed him. This explains a lot about our dynamic. So what he chose to do as a result of that is if he couldn't be faster than me, he would start running longer. So he started running ultra marathons, and he has since done many, many, many 100-mile races. He did one that was from the North Carolina, Virginia border to the North Carolina, South Carolina border. And it was like, I think you had 8 days to do it, and he did it in 7, or something to that effect. So it's interesting. I don't know. I don't feel like we got along super well when I was a kid, but what's been cool is that after, I went out on my own and started doing all the entrepreneur stuff, and it started moving more in the direction of working. When he was getting ready, he went, after he got out, he got his MFA and started writing. And when he was trying to build up, as he's trying to have this book launch, he needed to make a website, a brand. He's trying to move into coaching for high performance people. And then suddenly I have all these skills that he doesn't know anything about, which is pretty cool. So I remember when I was younger, I kind of had the decision to make. I was like, even if I join the military, I try to be competitive with him. He's done some things that you can't do twice. So there's no way to win. At best, I'd be able to equal him. But I was like, okay, if I was going to beat him, how would I do it? I was like, okay, I don't think he's very good at people stuff. He's very introverted. So if I got really good at people, then I'm optimizing for something that I could be competitive in, right? And that led me into sales and marketing and pitching and all this kind of stuff. Because I'm also very introverted by nature, but I've made myself very extroverted.
How was sales when you first got into it?
I've always found sales extraordinarily difficult. So while technically for our company, I'm our primary salesperson, and I have been sufficient from doing my own sales for the last several years. When I started, it was my first 2 sales jobs were very different from the kind of stuff that I do now. I used to work at a movie store at the mall in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and we had a program to sell memberships and magazine subscriptions. And I had a really wonderful manager, Miss Julie. And she was herself an amazing salesperson, but she just let us do the work. And then she would come over and sell somebody $300 worth of stuff, and then she would just go back to doing whatever. She's amazing. So I ended up getting really into that. And by the end of the best month that I had there, I was number 3 in the region. So it was like, okay, cool. I've got something going here. I was reading all the self-help books at this time, like Think and Grow Rich and Win Friends and Influence People. And I ended up meeting a guy that worked at the hair straightener kiosk outside of our store in the mall. And that was a weird experience. I never was great at that. That's very high pressure sales. I really don't like it. But I did at one point have a week where this is super under the table. You get paid with an envelope full of cash and just random bills. It would have some Hebrew written on it. So at one point I got an envelope with $2,200. I had never seen this much money in my life. I grew up in rural North Carolina. It's not a lot going on there. I think I was 19 or something. We went out every night. We woke up at random people's houses. I would come to the mall and buy your clothes in the morning because we didn't have time to go home. And we did that for 2 weeks, and I didn't run out of money. It was like, okay, I'm kind of done with this. This is not fulfilling. I did all the stuff I wanted to do. I was like, okay, I need to get out of this town. It was either join the military or go to college. I had 2 years in between when I ended up going to school. I made the deal with myself that if I get into school, I'm not going to do sales again. So for a long time, I didn't. I went to school for marketing for 3 semesters. I hated it, but I really only went to get out of town. And in the process, a lot of what got me into pitching was trying to avoid selling, right? Because I figured, okay, there's a way that you can present things to people that is itself persuasive, where I don't have to push. Because on the hair straightener kiosk watching, I've seen crazy stuff. The guy that I worked for, when he would get people to come back for refunds, he had one time this girl bought one, her dad came in, she was an adult, it was weird, but she was probably 22 or something. Her dad came in and argued with him and ended up leaving with $400 more in hair straighteners. I'm not that kind of person. I don't want to be that kind of person. He had a lot of issues that made him like that. But I was like, okay, there's got to be another way to do this, right? And so that is the long kind of thread that led me into pitching, which is how do you sell without selling? How do you sell without pushing? How do you make something so appealing that people want it without you having to ask them? Right.
Okay. So when we begin to go deeper into this, why is it that you didn't like this aggressive sales approach?
I am a pretty independent person, and I don't like it when people take away my agency. And what you realize with sales is that it's a lot of power, and you can get people to do things that they don't necessarily want to do because they get caught up in the emotions in the moment and it seems like a great idea. And that just has always felt wrong to me. And I know in a perfect world, this is not me condemning all salespeople. Like a good salesperson in selling a good product is trying to help you solve a problem that you have. And it should be an awesome experience. That is what good sales are like. I think I just was biased because I learned at some point what the hair straighteners cost, or like $7 wholesale or something like that. And then I felt bad, because up until then I told them, like, hey, don't tell me how, I don't want to know that much about it. It seems like you're a great hair straightener. We're going to sell the hair straightener. And then you find out like they're all kind of crap. And it was interesting because I kind of amended my decision not to do sales. I do sales, and I've accepted that what I'm doing is sales, but I still kind of kept that approach to, if somebody comes and talks to me, I'm not going to try and persuade you to work with me. If you don't want to if we don't have something that you want, we're going to have a bad time, and the client relationship is going to be way, way better when I have people that are super enthusiastic. And that's what I've just found over time. Anytime you have a sales interaction where you're pushing or forcing it, you're doing the wrong thing. And maybe there are other businesses or different types of products where it would work to do that. But the kind of work that I do is you have to be very close to the people you work with. You have to really get them. You have to work around their personality and know them very well. And in my ideal world, I would like to have 10 clients that I work with forever, as opposed to, 5 clients a month that just cycle through. It's much more interesting to have those long-term relationships and be surrounded by people that you like and enjoy being around.
Would you consider sales farming or hunting?
Depends on how you go about it. Sales is definitely, I would say, much more hunting. Sales is the aggressive kind of masculine force of I'm going to do this thing. And pitching is the attractive force of you're going to want this thing. And ideally you're doing both. You come into a sales environment with a pitch, and depending on how much you know about the person, you can tailor it to them. But in a perfect world, your pitch is so good that it works in the cases that you have presented to you, right? And when you've pitched, when you've said the number, the sale starts to happen, right? At whatever point you're calling them to action, you switch from that kind of passive presentation mode into the active. I'm now negotiating with you. I'm negotiating your emotions, your wants and needs, objection handling, whatever. And so you need both. Sales is definitely the hunting part. And you can break it down to, people have different ways of doing this, but setters and closers. Lead gen is really the hunting, and closing is a lot more like harvesting, I guess, moving in for the kill. I don't know whatever language you want to use for it. But yeah, I think good marketing is farming, It depends on, you can have much shorter term marketing. There's the direct response stuff that moves really quickly, but good marketing is a lot more farming. It's a lot more pitching because you're slowly building up that awareness of what you do and making people interested in it naturally.
What happened after you got into sales? Did you just stick into it, or did you do something more?
No, I mean, I had those 2 sales jobs, and that really helped me get out of my shell. I was very introverted as a teenager, and when you work 11 hours on a kiosk in a mall and you have to ask strangers to buy a hair straightener, that really gets you exposed. I went to school for marketing. It was a really bad time in my life. I wasn't very happy. And what I kind of resolved while I was there was, hey, I need to figure out something else. So I dropped out and started a business with some guys I used to do sales with. One of them quit immediately. He was a terrible fit. Me and the other one did the trash business for a year. He was also a sales guy, my co-founder, and we just happened to pick the hardest thing in the world to sell. So selling contracts to apartment complexes to do valet trash services is very, very difficult for 20-year-olds, for reference. So we wore suits. We did so much over the top stuff to try and make that work. We did a code drive. We did a conference. We got a booth. I designed a step and repeat, and we had a trash bag full of prop money. I was like, are you throwing money away on your trash services? Stuff like that. And I would stay up all night doing research on apartment complexes, the contacts, and all this kind of stuff. By the end of the year, we got nowhere. We had a couple meetings, but what we learned is that a couple things. One, all the contracts for the apartment complexes are done in October. So we started in May and ended in May. There's a short amount of time that we could have been successful, but the vast majority of that time, we completely blew it, right? But there's no way to know that getting into it. The other thing was that I learned years later, I told this story to someone and they explained this to me, that with older industries like that, the expectation is that you go to a trade show for 3 years and then people are going to talk to you. Something else that happened 3 years later, I was at this point working at Tesla in Reno. I checked my LinkedIn and saw I had a message from the one woman who managed the largest number of complexes in Fayetteville, North Carolina. We've been trying to get a meeting with her endlessly. And she said, we're ready to talk now. 3 years later. So I kind of resolved from that. I was like, okay, the next thing I do, I'm just going to do it and stick with it. Because if we had stuck with that for 3 years, while it would have been completely unsustainable, we would have gotten the biggest contract that we were looking for. Totally could have gotten that. We had a better offer than the other companies. It's a very old industry. It's not innovative at all. Their brands are ugly. They're not well liked by a lot of residents of apartment complexes. There's a lot of turnover. So we could have beaten them, but that was what I learned from that. I was like, okay, cool. So we did something right. We did something right, but we didn't understand the game we were playing, and we didn't understand the timeline that we had to play this game. And ultimately, I really wasn't excited to wake up in the morning and do trash services, So I was like, okay, what could I do that I could keep doing forever? What is something that's going to give me energy that I'd be willing to suffer through 3 years of not getting there, or 5 or 10.
Was that job beneath your standards?
It's less about that. It's just not meaningful. So I was happy to do it. We were going to do the labor ourselves if we got a complex, which would have been like every single day, like 5 or 6 days a week, doing probably trash from 7 p.m. till 11 p.m. or something like that. It would have been a lot. But I was happy to do it. I've had a lot of interesting jobs. I built fences for a while. I was a painter. I'd done site maintenance as a contractor for setting up military training. We were not doing stuff in the military. We just did it on behalf of the military, like very well-paid janitors that did crazy stuff. So I don't mind hard work. I've done all kinds of it. In that case, it's just like, what am I giving my life to? I want something that I care about,
So why were you both qualified for that sales job, but he wasn't, that guy that just wasn't qualified?
Oh, he just didn't put any effort in. So we had the two of us it was my first co-founder experience of like, we were just like on the same page. We'd stay up super late. We had whiteboards all over the house. We were like scheming. We wrote the business plan like 6 or 7 times. The other guy lived in New York as well, which didn't help, but he also didn't do anything. We gave him tasks. He didn't do them. And it was like, he maybe lasted a month. Still a buddy is with him. As a rule, working with your friends is usually a mistake. You should have a business relationship with people and then befriend them. But thinking that your friends are going to be great business partners is basically wrong. It's just, you don't want to do it.
So I'm assuming you'd never start a family business.
Well, it's funny. My current co-founder, his family had a family business that he worked in, and it was wildly successful, and they exited and got bought by Bain Capital. So maybe I would. If I did it, it would be different. I don't know. I've always thought that what I would like to do is when I have kids, to have them, like, if I'm going to work from home, that they see what I do and they get to come to meetings and sit in. And, if they can learn any of the stuff that I had to learn manually over the last 10 years about, like, how do you present yourself? How do you do sales? How do you build relationships and negotiate contracts and stuff like that? I think that'd be super valuable, and you'd be way better off in life. But certainly, am I going to go ask my people in my family as it stands if they want to join the business? Like, no. My mom would be a really great clerical person, though. She's a travel agent now. She would be great at it. But any amount of entrepreneurial related stress would make her have a neurotic breakdown. She's just not have the constitution for it. I'm the only entrepreneur in my family. My uncle, I think he did tile, which, he had his own tile business. I guess entrepreneurial, but different in the sense that it's not like, that's a trade with rules and it's straightforward and there's clear demand. You're not explaining stuff versus like the stuff that I've fallen into is very like hard to explain. I tried to tell my grandma what my job is. She doesn't really get it. And it's a lot of making stuff up, guessing, like we talked about.
How do you get your information? Do you read?
Oh, yeah, no, I don't know if you see it. I have a bookshelf in here. I've got I'm avid reader. I've read probably all of the major business books at this point. And that kind of what's interesting is I found in the last couple of years where I used to be, I would read a book a week. I now read a lot less and have kind of resolved towards the learning that I need to learn comes from the doing. So instead of saying, oh, well, what about this? What about that? Like, let's try something, let's test it, let's measure it and see what works. And I think that I had the luxury of being in that position because I did read so much for so long. And so one of the things I don't like when people say is like, you'll get some guy who's like a billionaire who's like, I only work 15 minutes a day now. And I think it's a great schedule. It's like, yeah, you're a billionaire. You can do that. The rest of us have to do stuff. But I don't want to say to young people watching this is like, don't read books. You should read all the books, read as much as you can. But there is a point where I think the best learning comes from actually doing stuff and trying things. And you cannot just do the reading. And this is mostly a message to my younger self, because that was how it was for a long time. I just read all the stuff and then wasn't, applying it or whatever. But I think no, it's not all of it is making it up. It's also, I've been in this for such a long time and I've seen so many startups. I probably have worked with well over 100 people. And I think I've probably spoken with thousands of startups and founders. It's tricky because there's not good education for it. And even if you have things that are like accelerators, a lot of the times the benefit of those programs like YC or something is that they connect you with people and those people help you. But we don't really have a good mechanism to teach people entrepreneurship in the world. If you go get an MBA, that's like qualifying you to be middle management somewhere, right? It's not teaching you how to be a founder or a CEO, which is very, very hard. And that it requires a lot of soft skills like being extraordinarily resilient, having a high tolerance for risk, having a high tolerance for making zero progress or being broke for a long time, just the high tolerance for eating shit for years. And that's kind of the trick of it. I think that's why there's not good education, because the people that are out there doing that don't have time to teach people about it. And the people that are out there teaching about it are probably not the ones doing it.
So do you think experience, knowledge, or character is more important for entrepreneurship?
Character. There are a lot of people that have, I'd say people with experience, but not character could be great parts of a startup, but not certainly the founders. People with knowledge and no experience, what are they going to do? And knowledge with no character is very dangerous. There are a lot of people who are very intelligent and not moral. And I think that's the most dangerous thing. But if you do know, a lot of stuff, you can be much more destructive, right? It's not easy to make an atomic bomb. Only smart people can do that. So it's important that knowledgeable people have character, and ideally having character, even if you have character and no knowledge, no experience, you can get those things. They're acquirable, but I don't think people typically develop character. I think a lot of people just lack it and never go anywhere to get it. But you can do hard stuff and that builds character too,
How did you build your character?
Just years of beating the ego out of myself through foolishness. I think one of the things, so my first co-founder, he had a lot of personal issues. His family situation is pretty screwed up. And he was also a Marine and got blown up. And he wasn't like physically handicapped, but he had some PTSD from the concussion that he got. And we had a lot of fights by the end of it. And we ended up, when we gave up on the business, we moved to Colorado. I was there for 6 months. And we had like 2 weeks after, not even, like maybe a week after we got there, we had a huge fight. He was buying a house in Pueblo, which is like an hour south of Colorado Springs. I was going to live with him. I moved across the country to go rent a room in his house. He's like, I don't want you to live with me anymore. We resolved this, but I was like, okay, I'm going to figure out how I never have to rely on anyone else again. I was at the time working in a microchip factory. I talked to one of the guys that was training me, and he was like, "Hey, why are you here? This place is full of 65-year-old guys and like 20-year-olds, and nobody likes it here. And everyone who's here is just waiting for their pension, and everyone else leaves. You should go to Tesla in Reno. They're building this factory, and you get a job there. It'd be better work for a better company." I was like, okay. So I applied and I got the job, but the only way that I could go, because I made so little money at the time, I had just started writing on the side. That was not a profit-making enterprise. But I had my last $200 and I bought a tent and I bought a sleeping bag, like a 0-degree sleeping bag. And I drove with everything I could pack in my car. And I just slept in the desert for a month until my paycheck from Tesla hit. That was probably the best month of my life. The absolute freedom of waking up, it's like cold outside and you unzip the tent and you're like 20 miles out of the city. There's nobody around. There's like a highway like a mile down in the ravine and like cold and there's no clouds in the sky. Like that was a great experience. And it sucked, honestly. My tent got destroyed twice from the wind. It rained for a week, so I had to sleep in my car and like my leg went numb, so I couldn't feel my foot for a week when I was sleeping in the car and all kinds of stuff. But it was awesome, and that sounds crazy, but I think that's why I like entrepreneurship, because that was awesome. That was a great time. And at the end of the month, I was fed up with it. And I ended up, so one of the guys that I met at work, buddies with, I moved in with him. Their roommate had just moved out. It was very convenient. But that was kind of like the turning point in my life because, in college, I had a really bad time. That first business, we really didn't know what we were doing. I feel like we did a great job considering that. And we did get it, get far enough to get interest from the person we were targeting. So I feel like that is a win. But none of it really made sense until I went out and I lived in a tent. I figured out, okay, what do I really care about? What do I want? I started writing a lot of philosophy then. That became a small media company of different writers and podcasters and stuff on Twitter. And we ended up, by the end of that, which we lasted about a year and a half, we had put on a 32 speaker, like digital conference. So I was slowly moving the direction of figuring stuff out. But what I learned was a lot of pieces of it, and it didn't really start making sense until later. And even now, I'm not going to say it makes perfect sense, but we pretty much know what we're doing, and we have a pretty defined service that we provide and a pretty defined audience that we work really well with, and they like us, and we can help people raise millions of dollars. And it just took 10 years of doing the wrong thing or doing part of the right thing and being blind to what the other pieces are. I probably couldn't have a normal job. It's just not for me.
Would you ever change or reverse anything in your life looking back now?
No. I resolved when I was younger that I think regret is a waste of time. And so you should, you can do things, I'd say with, obviously if you like, oh no, I got in a car accident and killed someone, you should probably regret that. That's a bad thing, right? But like, as far as the decisions that you make in your life, you just have to own it. And what also comes from that, if you say, hey, I don't regret it, is the acknowledgement that everything that happened to me led me here. And you wouldn't know the things that you know and be where you are now without those things happening to you, even if they sucked, even if you did dumb stuff, which I've done plenty of dumb stuff. But I think that attitude is so important because it's a fast. You can either accept the past or not, but you can't change it. So get over it, move forward.
So what is forward for you?
It's interesting. My overarching goal in life is to figure out how to build a city. Even if I managed to build a small town or little village with a couple houses that I got to assist in designing and layout of, then I would be satisfied. That would be what I want out of life, which is a lot of why I got into entrepreneurship. I've done a lot of design work. I've met a lot of people who are in architecture or sustainable development. But at some point, the way that you get stuff like that done is through pitching, right? And if you can present a good enough vision of something, you can go find people that'll pay for it. But that's like, let's call that the 40-year goal, right?
So you mean run a city like, a politician, or to build a city more like kind of real estate architect?
I think the way that we have cities designed causes a lot of the problems that we have in the world, because we've, in America, decided to design cities around cars. So you now live further from people. You have huge amounts of space dedicated to parking lots, which are, raise the temperature of the city, which makes it really, you live in Austin, you walk around downtown in the summer, it sucks. It's really hot. But we don't have city designed for community. We have city designed for commerce. And so you go into town, it's just a place to buy stuff, right? There's not a place to hang out or to be or to interact with people in a meaningful way. There's a guy that I met, his name is Soel. He was, I believe, from Lebanon. And he said when he was a kid, they lived in like a 3-story building. At the bottom floor, there was like a little shop. And it was just a bunch of families in different rooms of this building, right? And so they would all have people just show up and have tea with you at random times of the day. Everybody knew everyone. They all like took care of the kids together. And sometimes the people from the shop, they would just like put down a basket on a rope and then pull it up, and the shop people would give them snacks and stuff like that. You think about it, like I just moved into this apartment. I don't know any of my neighbors, and I maybe can meet them. I've lived in other apartments before. I also didn't know my neighbors, and we don't have a culture that supports knowing your neighbors or being invested in your community. And that leads to so many problems. Like loneliness causes huge amounts of physical and mental issues. And then with the way that you raise your kids, when people are isolated, it's harder to raise your kids. If people have less kids, which perpetuates other issues. So it's such a complicated set of problems. But if you could show people like, hey, here's a better way of living, then it'd be really easy for people to copy that, right? Like after America made their constitution, almost every other modern country in the world copied some version of it. And they did their own versions. Like the one in India is like 180,000 pages long or something like that, which is crazy. I think it's the longest constitution of the world. But the principles of it were based on the American Constitution because everyone kind of agreed, oh, this is a better way to do things. And I think that's the way that the world moves forward is some people do crazy things, and sometimes those things are better. And when they are, then everyone kind of says, oh, we're going to do that now. You think about phones before the iPhone, right? The twisty phones, flippy phones, slidey phones, brick phones, tablet phone, whatever. iPhone comes out, everyone agrees this is the right form factor, made it a little bit bigger over the years. And then everything's a black rectangle, right? Because that's just how society moves forward, you know?
And now we have phones with 3 screens.
It seems like overkill. My buddy has one. I don't see the utility of that, but it is cool looking. I will say that.
Speaking of cool looking things, how do you sort of view this idea of work-life balance?
You know, I was thinking about this a little bit recently because for a while, last year, Lucid has consumed the majority of my time. Somebody asked me this, said, hey, what do you do for fun? I had to sit there and think about it. It was like, I work. And I like my job. I enjoy what we do. When I'm not at work during the day, I try to work like 10 to 5. And if we're busy, I'll work like 8 to 6. At night, usually most nights I'll be going to a networking event or some other kind of social thing to meet people because I have to go meet people for finding clients. And so the entirety of my life has just been consumed by work during the day, have meetings with people during the day, go to events at night, which is cool because it kind of makes it easy to like find out what you're doing. But I realized I was like, I probably need to maybe devote like 20% of my time to doing stuff for me next year. And so my intention next year, when I worked at the microchip factory and at Tesla, our schedule was 3 days on, 4 days off, 4 days on, 3 days off. I think that was the most productive time in my life because on the weekends, I would just get up, go to the gym, go write for 4 or 5 hours, do some design work, play guitar, go to sleep. And I'm going to try bringing that back next year. So if I can get where I do, like 3 10-hour days, 4 days off, 4 10-hour days, 3 days off, then I can start using the weekends to be creative. Because I find trying to squeeze creativity when my job demands lots of creativity for me is really, really hard. Because by the time I get done during the day, I'm not like, oh, I want to go right now. I want to go do some design work for myself. I was like, no, I just did 6 hours of design work. I don't want to do any design work. I want to get it out of my office, So I think everything is trade-offs. I make trade-offs to do this. I like the trade-offs that I make. I've optimized to make these trade-offs, but certainly you have to pay attention to your mental health and not do things that are unsustainable. Like if you just run yourself ragged, I've been doing this for a long time because I figured out how to survive for a long time. If you go as hard as we went when we did the trash business where we would stay up super late and all that stuff, It will not last. You can't do that. So just making sure that you go to the gym and sleep. I have sleep penciled in my calendar. I have the gym penciled in my calendar. All that stuff is recurring and set up in advance. You have to make sure that you do that because you can't sustain letting the other things slip.
Now, this has been a really insightful and definitely a very in-depth interview. Do you have any closing final words you'd like to say to the audience?
I would say if you're listening to this and you're thinking about entrepreneurship and what I described sounds fun to you, you should do it. And if what I've described doesn't sound fun to you, you should consider getting a normal job. I had a very weird life. It's not so uncommon when you get into founders and being the kind of person that is a founder or being the kind of person that's working in startups or entrepreneurship is very different. It requires a different kind of person. And knowing that about yourself is important because there are a lot of people I know that don't have the constitution for this, that do it, and they suffer as a result. If you are that kind of person, also know that if you just stick at it long enough, it will get better. I'm not saying you're going to go out and suddenly make $1 million or something like that, but certainly you will figure out how to survive and provide services to people and be more valuable. And it will all make sense. And the older you get, the easier it gets because nobody takes you seriously when you're 20, and there's nothing you can do about that. It's just an obstacle to work around. I just turned 30 and it's like, oh, I'm now an adult in the eyes of adults, right? When you're 25 or 23, nobody cares what you have.
All right. Well, thank you again for being on the show, Mr. Dailey. I will see you all next time on the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So, how are you doing today? Could you kind of give me a brief introduction, who you are, what you're about, and sort of what your message is today? What were you doing before you began all this? Okay. What was your father's influence towards your life? How was sales when you first got into it? Okay. So when we begin to go deeper into this, why is it that you didn't like this aggressive sales approach? Would you consider sales farming or hunting? Excellent. So what happened after you got into sales? Did you just stick into it or did you do something more? So why were you both qualified for that sales job, but he wasn't, that guy that just wasn't qualified? So I'm assuming you'd never start a family business. But you don't make up everything though, right? How do you get your information? Do you read? So do you think experience, knowledge, or character is more important for entrepreneurship? How did you build your character? Would you ever change or reverse anything in your life looking back now? So what is forward for you? So you mean run a city like, a politician, or to build a city more like kind of real estate architect? I don't know. Speaking of cool looking things, how do you sort of view this idea of work-life balance? Excellent. Now, this has been a really insightful and definitely a very in-depth interview. But just before I let you off here from this great interview, do you have any closing final words you'd like to say to the audience? All right. Well, thank you again for being on the show, Mr. Dailey. This is the Paris Perspective, episode 181. I will see you all next time on the show. She will.